HTTP call and receive back some data. Specifically, so when we're thinking about REST, again, the focus is because that's emerging. We have SOAP supporting the product. It's staying around. We might be able to do a little better in the future, but basically works, but it's not a focus. I mean, it's required because there are countries, there are than if you have just to do everything by hand. And the other thing that's relevant, but I'm not going to focus much into it because it will be like this. I could spend an entire talk of open authentication. I'm kind of going to skip it. Authentication support, which is something that was limited in Delphi before this library. Okay, so the foundations are, the first element we're going to focus on is called REST Debugger. The REST Debugger is a very simple tool that embeds the REST components, and you can use it to test your calls, to make sure your calls work, to find, and then when you have everything working, you have the starting point for building, for moving the same parameters and the same settings into your application. Okay? So let's take a look to the REST debugger. And it's not, I mean, I've hooked it here. It's a separate standalone. So that's it. It's a very simple UI. The information you have to put here first is the URL you want to connect with. So let's say, I don't know, just typing something. Oh, let's see. No, I don't think Google is a good idea. Let's see. So suppose you want to hook this URL, and you just say, okay, let's try it out. Let's send a request. Well, is this? I can get a separate connection. Sorry for this. I checked it earlier. It was working. Information about the execution and other things. Okay, so that's not like a real REST request, but just to give you a feeling of how you can handle it. Now, I can customize the request. The other thing you can do when you have a request, you can save it. So you can store your requests, reuse them over time. So I'm going to get one demo, which is this one. Okay. So this is a specific request to a web service. Web service has music information. It's called API discogs.com. Now this is not the complete URL of the service. The REST library has this concept of the URL is the kind of base URL, the kind of no, it's not the entry point, it's the base location shared by the entire application structure. But then you have the specific portion of the URL, which is the resource. So within a single service, you can have multiple resources you can access to using different URIs, different unique resource identifiers. So this is an example. The base API and the actual specific URI, and the two are combined into a single URL. Okay. So what happens here is that as soon as, in many cases, one place where you can add parameters in a REST call is not using actual parameters like question mark and values, but one place you can add parameters is right onto the command line. So suppose, so what we have as an option is the ability to use angle curly braces and a name, and this becomes automatically a parameter that's recognized by the engine. That's a good point. Possibly. Okay, is it better?
Yes.
So you just type something, and it will figure out that this is a URL parameter or URL segment parameter. So the library has support for URL segment parameters and also for standard get post parameters. So you can add something and value or sample value, and you'll have another parameter that will be added on the URL. If it's a post or get request, will be appropriately added to the HTTP request. So again, the idea is that rather than working at the physical HTTP level, you work at a more abstract level with the concept of parameters. Although the technical implementation could be different depending on the scenario. Again, trying to abstract rather than having to work really at the brain on that. Okay, so let's get rid of this parameter because it's pointless. And so this is the basic request, parameter artist/name, and this is a filter, so that if we send this request, we get back a data structure that is a JSON structure that includes information about this specific singer. Okay. Now there is another concept. In many cases, the response you receive has multiple parts. There might be some metadata, or like this is the request you made, and other things, and then there's the actual response. So for example, here there's an object that internally has a response object. So what you can actually do is say, I don't care, I only care for this sub-element, which is the actual response. So you can apply a filter, and you receive only the kind of actual data of your response object. Because a lot of JSON you receive has this like nested structure. At times you have things like paging on the outside or other things you don't really care about. It's not part of what you're looking for. So this root element allows for some filtering. Okay, and again, there are more things that I'm not going to touch much. There's authentication. There are many authentication methods. There is proxy server support. So there are actually other features. So suppose this is what we want to. We want to create an application that hooks to this data structure. Now the next thing we have to do is to get back to Delphi and create an application like this. And I'm not sure I actually have a yeah, we should have a little extra time. So let's actually do one by hand. Let's call this VCL REST. And most of the others will be mobile apps. Let's start actually with VCL app. Why not? VCL forms. What you should have, not forms. Default layout. So this is a very simple VCL app. And what we want to do is to drop some of these REST components of the REST client library. So actually we need the REST client, and we need a REST response, and we need a REST request. And that's what will get you started. You don't need the three every time, but for a simple visual app, that's what you can. So the REST client is the main component, the one that again defines the connection. So if we open our debugger again, this is the main configuration for the REST client, the URL. So I'm going to copy this from here, move it to my REST client. There's a base URL property, and I paste it here. Okay. So now, within the single client, we can have multiple requests and responses. The requests and responses are generally working coupled. But again, you can have a single response and multiple requests. You can avoid the response and just use data in memory, write some extra code. So it's not that you have to use all of the components. You can just have the REST client and everything else could be code. Okay. But for example, for parameters management, it's nice actually to have the REST request, because the REST request manages the parameters. So if we look at here, there are no parameters right now. But then if we go back to our configuration and grab this parameter and paste it in the resource identifier property, this is going to be our URL. And by the way, given there is a parameter in the URL, we have the ready-to-use URL segment parameter, and we can provide a value. So, okay. I hope I can type it right. No. Okay, so this is our parameter. Now notice that when I drop a request, it hooks the client, and then I will create the response, it hooks to the request. Of course, when you have multiple, you have to do that manually. So the idea is the REST client is the main component. You connect a response, you connect a request to the client, and then the response is connected to the individual request. So again, multiple requests and multiple responses. If you want to go completely visual, I mean, again, it's good to get started, but then one Python can create these components dynamically. You just write some extra code. Okay. Now, the nice thing about this is that this technology has full design time support. So what you can actually do here is do something like execute the request. It's not the most useful response, but say, okay, we did it. So we did it is 200. Okay. And now this means that the request is executed and the response should be populated. In fact, if we go to response content, we actually get to see the actual data. Okay. So again, potentially we can put this root element to filter out what we're looking for. And so if we want to write some code, and this will be a very ugly application, just drop a memo and a button, and all we'll have to do at runtime is say, do what we just did at design time, which is REST response 1 execute the request, not the response. REST request 1 dot execute. And there is a portion with parameters and one without. And at that point, you can say memo 1 dot text equals, we're going to grab the response. And from the response, we get the, always get confused. JSON value dot toString, I think it is the filtered version. So we run this, and we get our, and again it was filtered. So if you grab the entire response, you get the string that was received. But if you extract the JSON value, this is already parsed and it considers the root element, so we'll get the sub element from the response. And then of course you'll need some, actually rather than grabbing, we'll navigate through that JSON value to get to specific elements in that data structure. So it does the mapping of the response to a tJSON value data structure automatically, does the parsing for you. Okay? So that's more or less the idea. Any question so far? Okay, so let me do another step and introduce you the last component. So I'm going to use the same server, but a slightly different request. In this case, the same API, the request is database search. There are no URL parameters, but there are actually multiple post parameters or get parameters. I think it's a get request. Okay. So if we run this, send this request, Again, we get back some data structure. You can see, for example, here that the first part is not relevant. Pagination, per page, items, who cares? The actual response is, I think it's called result. They get confused. Wait, what is that? Results. Okay. So the actual information we need is results. Apply. And this is our cleaner structure. Okay. Now this structure is interesting because it is basically it's an array of objects which more or less have the same internal structure. So given it's an array of objects with a rather stable structure, not only we can consider them from a JSON point of view, but what we can do, we can take that structure and try to create an in-memory table with that information. And in fact, this is what the debugger does for you. It will let you look at that data in a tabular structure. So, and again, you need to have like the right JSON. It doesn't always work, but in some cases, you can do remapping to a tabular structure. Okay, so to accomplish this, we need to go change our code, and actually I can add another request. Oops. Well, okay, let's do it this way. I have an existing app that does that. It didn't save this. Wait, let's remove this one. Let's do save. Code conferences, ITDevCon 5, REST library, VCN REST, VCN REST form. Okay, just in case we need to get back to it. And now I want to grab this mobile music client. Okay, so this uses the same API. The request is database search, exactly what I had in the debugger a minute ago. And then there is the response. But then there's one other component, which is this response dataset adapter. This can populate a dataset, either a client dataset or a FDMM table, using the metadata and the data that comes from the JSON data structure. So this is my client dataset, and I could replace it with a main table. And then ultimately, if you have a dataset and you have a list view, what you could do is use live bindings to do the mapping. Now, if we open the live binding designer, this was already pre-built, so we have some connection from this URI and from this country structure. But of course, it's difficult to use it because we don't have the data, we don't know which are the valid fields, so it becomes like quite cumbersome. Unless we execute the request and we populate the in-memory table at design time. So at this point, we can really drag the information that we want to see. This is empty. Year, January. But again, the original was it title? No. Okay, I messed it up. So text should be title, and country should be header. Okay. So I'm creating the UI with these headers. I have a grouping by country in the client dataset because it's sorted by that field. And so I can create my mobile application and see how the data will look like. Of course, I should move all of this stuff to a data module. Otherwise, it becomes pretty messy. You can get a good feeling of what the application will look like when it's executed on your mobile device, but it's here at design time. And you can even say, yeah, that's nice, but how will it look on an iPhone? Okay, there it is. Oh, in an old iPhone. Okay, here it is. So you get a very good way to preview it on different devices, get a feeling of what the application will be like with the actual data visible, and like before you have even started. I mean, this adds, again, that's what the thing I was saying about live binding, really adding a lot of value to application development. And then again, if later on the application grows and you overgrow live binding, you can replace that with actual code, but the ability to start very fast with something visual. So the ability to send this REST request and previewing the data design time is actually very significant. Okay, of course this works only if you have a database mapping for your data. If you just have JSON objects, there's no live binding. Okay, so that's more or less the idea. Okay, so these are the actual components: REST client, REST request, REST response. With this dataset adapter, and again, it's completely platform independent. Works throughout VCL, desktop, mobile, FireMonkey, even a console application or a server-side application. Why not? Could piggyback on further web service requests. Okay. Feature-wise, there are a few things that are also relevant. There is asynchronous execution. So here I've done execute. You can also do execute async and provide an anonymous method that will be executed when the request is done. Because synchronous requests are blocking. So it's not something you want to deploy generally. You want to deploy with a sync request. Because in case the phone is not connected or there is a problem with the server, the UI will get stuck, which is not nice. So there's async support, there's proxy support, there's HTTPS support, authentication, some JSON parsing formatting, JSON to object mapping. There are actually quite a few features that are available throughout this library. So in terms of demos, I wanted to, we've seen this music service. I wanted to focus on a couple of usage scenarios that I find slightly more interesting. One is creating an app that has data snap behind the scenes. Data snap can expose REST, not in the ideal way, but can expose REST. So we can try to look into how to create a client for a standard data snap REST server. And the other, which is equally, even if not more important, is how you can create a client for a server written with Web API, which is one of the emerging ASP.NET technologies for creating web services. I mean, Microsoft keeps kind of changing a bit their server-side technologies, but this is at least currently is considered the best, the new API to use for web service development. And it's actually quite a nice API to use, I have to say. So let's start with the data snap demo. Save change? No. Ding, ding, ding. Should be down here. Okay, I actually have to. Let's try this one. Oops. Interesting. Okay. Okay, so this is a data snap server. I just created it with the wizard. There's very limited code into it. The server methods. Okay, this one I need to double check. I need to double check if interface is running. Well, it seems this is connecting fine. Okay, so there is the classic reverse string method, very powerful, very sophisticated. So what it's doing is reverse string. So, but it's kind of the starting point for any DataSnap demo, so let's go for it. Let's suppose we want to create a client for this call. So of course we need to run this service. Well, it's just a client. We couldn't run without debugging. So the IDE kind of keeps responding decently. Client form. So the REST client will just refer to localhost 8080 DataSnap REST. Server methods 1. This is the class that exposes the service. I mean, you can decide to which point of the URL you consider the service location and which point is the individual resource, the individual request. It's kind of up to you. So this is the REST client, and then the first request will be to do reverse string. And reverse string has a parameter on the URL, which is the actual string you want to reverse. So here I've typed reverse string / curly brace value, and so I do have a value parameter, and I just use as a default value hello world. And so now what I can, and I have a request, a response connected to this request. This drives to response 1. So I can run this, and we can double check and see that we're going to have the response, which is hello world reversed. So you can preview that, yeah, it seems to be working, and then go ahead and write the code. Okay? So that's one of the things. So yeah, you can use the REST client library as a replacement of the DataSnap clients. Now, there are a few things that are missing right now, which is like, you don't get the proxy that makes it easier to make the calls. So there are a few things missing that we are looking forward to like fill these gaps and make the REST client a full DataSnap client library. But it's usable. Now the question becomes, okay, fine, but what if I want to return a table? Now here things get slightly more tricky, because you can return a table and get the JSON mapping by creating a getData method and just returning a data set. It will work. It will create a REST response with a JSON structure with the table data. However, the table format that we are returning from a DataSnap server is the most awkward format you've probably ever seen from a table. It's not even by record, it's by column. So it has column name and all of the values, and column name and all of the values, which I think was done to save like a few bytes here and there, but ultimately it's very messy. So if you return a data set, I just returned the data set directly. You'll get JSON, but that JSON will be very hard to process and turn into another data set, unless you fall back to using the DataSnap specific readers that will recreate the tables for you. But if you want to use the REST client library, you probably want to not have like DataSnap compiling to your clients. So you might want to go for something which is actually not too difficult to do, although this is very trivial. I mean, of course, it's not like completely done properly. For example, numbers are mapped to strings where they shouldn't. I depend on null values and a couple of things. But it's like just a short demo. So what I'm doing here, I'm just returning a JSON array. Okay? So I'm returning a JSON array, I run the query, open it, and for each row I create a JSON object, and the object is going to have name-value pairs with the field name, the field value, field name, field value, field name, field value. Again, should be improved a bit in terms of handling the values and not just doing a string. And I do have some code, but it's a little too complicated for this thing. Okay, so at this point we could just create the JSON array, which is a result, and return it. However, there is a little issue here, is that DataSnap returns results into an array of results, and the result itself is an array, so it's like a double array. And the REST client library doesn't really like this double array structure, so it doesn't There's apparently no easy way to make it recognize the actual data within the array. So the solution would be to just return the JSON structure. And I say data name, okay, don't worry, I know what I'm doing. This is the JSON. And it's not that difficult. The only thing you have to do is to, rather than returning the JSON array as a result, or beyond returning the JSON array as a result, you say response content is the JSON array to string. So you just return the JSON string. Okay. That's it. It's a bit tricky, but that's the idea. Just force the HTTP, this forces the HTTP response, kind of bypassing some of the data snap internals. And of course, in the future, we'll kind of try to make this more straightforward. That's what you have to do. Okay, so this is a bit of a trick, but just overrides the actual response. So the response is a clean JSON response with no extra structures. And at this point, with this server, with this code, what we can do in our request 2 is to do get data. And you guess what? Now we can get a response and hook it to a data snap adapter and hook it to a mem table and hook it to a bind source and hook it to a list view. And when we execute our request, we get our first name, last name, because that's what I picked in the designer. Full name. I could have just picked the first name. Full name kind of makes sense. Okay, so table on the server, return by data snap in a slightly non-standard way, and then the REST client library of the client, and you can create a client app that just hooks to the right data structure and does the automatic mapping to your in-memory table. And now, beside the like binding, I mean, now you have a data set in memory. You can store it locally to a local DB. You can keep it around. You can save it to file. You can use it as a cache. I mean, you can do whatever you want. It's a data set in memory. Just create the UI and build it any way you want. Okay. So that's kind of where we are. And again, the goal is over time to, on one side, there is some work being done to better integrate FireDuck with DataSnap, and on the other side, better integrate the REST client library with DataSnap. So like at the end of the process, it will be kind of easier to do this kind of data mapping from server to client. Okay, so that's the DataSnap client demo. Now the other thing, actually I do have a second one. Let me show that, and then we'll move to the web API demo. The other one is this one. So this server is slightly more complex. Okay. Because it has a complete set of operations on an object. So there is a rule in DataSnap that you can, if you create a method that has by default, methods are mapped to get HTTP operations. But if you have a method that starts with one of the recognized prefixes, accept, update, or cancel, then it becomes a method with the same URL. The URL will always be contact, but put, post, or delete operation is required to invoke these further methods. So there's a mapping between the URL name, the method names, and the actual HTTP operations that are performed, that are executed to reach those methods. Okay, and there is a global return everything list. In terms of code, well, there is quite some code here. Nothing extraordinary, but there is quite some code. There are objects in memory. Let's do put, this is a creation, is to create a JSON object for the tContact class and do this mapping. It uses object to JSON mapping layer. And the data structure in memory is just a dictionary, tContact dictionary. And tContact dictionary is just defined as a class with keys and contact objects. And contacts is just somewhere model. It's just a very simple structure here. Of course, could be like something more complex. Okay. So again, this server has a dictionary. When it starts, I think it creates 1 or 2 objects automatically, or maybe not. When you create, what is it here? You can create a new put. Put updates the object. So it will create a contact out of the JSON and then save it in the for the given ID. And post will add a new contact. Delete will remove it, and get, of course, will read it. So we'll do contacts get contact by ID and convert the result to JSON. The code is a little complicated, but it was meant to show a couple of things. And now on the client side, we also have the model in the client, of course. We have a data module with the version request. And notice that if you look at the GET request, the name is GET request. The URL is contact/ID. ID is a parameter, which one you want to get. If we look into, for example, delete request, there is the same identical resource reference, same identical resource name. But one of the features of the request object is the method you want to call. So in this case, the remote method is delete. In this case, it's get. And of course, this is post and this is put. So we have the 4 HTTP methods invoked for the various request. Okay, again, so rather than going low level and manually specifying the method in the HTTP headers, you can just abstract the concept and say, okay, this is the invocation method for my server. And list is just a list of things. So this is and there is a single response. They are all bound to the same response, so they will populate, and then you can use it for reading back the data. So the client is a bit awkward, and I'm wondering, I might not be able to run it from the phone. Let's do something weird, which is try to run it on Windows. So the client is basically not a user interface, it's just a testing client. So what you can do is specify the method and do the invocation. But wait, is this running? No, I think this is the previous one. So first I need to run the server. And okay. And next I need to try the client on Windows, which I haven't tried, I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, it is very ugly. Access. So this is the get all execution. Oh great, it's stuck. it might have a hard-coded IP address. Close down. Yeah. Okay. Let me double check. So this is running on the local machine, and form unit. Okay, it's on 8080. So the client in the data module as a REST client. The good thing about this separation of the first part of the URL and everything else is there's only one place when you have the domain name, so the main reference. So it's actually run here, and I need to change it to localhost. And I have this up working on the phone, but I'll have to know if I can type localhost. I'll have to check the IP address, and let's try it locally. But what I want to show you, that's actually good. Okay, so yeah, so it works. We have 3 objects, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, very smart. Now what we can do, we can say, okay, we want to do get operation, so we need the ID and execute, and we get the actual object. And maybe we want also to do update operation. So we say, okay, object 1 actually changes to oops, 1. Change to myself, execute, and then if you go back to get all and get the list, that's changed. Or if I want to create a new one, this should be a new one. Okay, yeah. So this is just an output returns, okay, the new object is number 4. It returns the item. Again, UI is ugly, but it like explains what's happening behind the scenes, so it makes sense for a developer, not for a user, to look at this kind of thing. And of course, we can do delete. So if we go delete, we just provide the ID. To that's gone. And technically, the client has just stacked. It's just an automatic user interface that's created depending on the parameter. There is some code behind it, and also the output is enabled depending on the actual operation you execute. So when you execute an operation, it will update the UI, and it's kind of easier for this one. So it determines where's the input, execute the get, and then we'll use a generic output method that will update the UI accordingly. Okay, so that's the idea. Now the last demo I wanted to show you is this one. This uses the Microsoft Web API. So the idea here is quite simple. On the server, I have a collection of C# objects. And on the client, I have a Delphi desktop and mobile application with visual bindings. Okay, so this is the source code. I mean, I have it in some VMs. It's just to give you a feeling of what there is. This is the, you just specify a base address, and then what you do, you have to register one or more, you register to a specific URL one or more services. So here, no, sorry, this is the configuration. It uses the native standalone HTTP client, so it doesn't require IIS. It works standalone somehow. So it's a standalone HTTP client, and it responds to API values, with a standard mechanism, but then the real thing that matters, so this is just the configuration, is that it has a controller. So what you do, you create controllers and then you install these controllers. Controllers are tied to specific APIs or URL segments. And then automatically a controller is going to have a get all and a get by ID. These are all methods that you basically have to implement, and a search mechanism. These are all part of the interface content you have to implement, and then the URL mapping is automatic inside the library. This is a smaller version. Actually, I have like a longer list. It magically gives you the idea. Okay. So in terms of client, let me open the client application. Okay, again, a REST client, and in this, I'm hosting this service on a public website. Now it was a bit tricky because this HTTP server allows only localhost. It's not, you can bind it to the external IP of the machine. They let you bind only to 127.0.0.1 because it's not optimized. Who cares? I mean, just let me use it. But I played some tricks on the server to expose it. So API products, and then the REST request goes for actually nothing. It's the main. There's only one request I'm making. So let me actually get back to the device. And I think I showed it earlier, but we can have look at the actual code. What's that? Go desktop and run the screenshots. Turn it on. Okay. So it's at the very end. This is Web API client. So this is the app, and again, this is the app at design time. This is the app at runtime, which, I think it got stuck before. Let me try again. Okay, just this refresh button, and then it'll show you the actual data. So I'm doing some grouping. And again, what I'm showing is, well, I mean, is data that comes from C# objects on the server. And beside the response adapter and beside the live bindings, I have this very complex amount of code, which is execute the request and activate the local data binding. So again, even at design time, even at design time, I can actually execute the request and get the data. And then in my client data set, what I've done sorting by, oh wait, should be sorted. What's the name of the field? Field defs, ID name category, so it should be sorted by category. And that's it. And now I can do the grouping with the live binding design. It's got a little spread out. Okay, come on here. Okay. So again, selected value, the same text, and the header text is the grouping type. That's it. So that's more or less the idea. So again, it can be used. It can be used in theory for like any server-side engine that just uses REST and JSON. This is only the starting point. We already have development in action for bus support, for extending the JSON to object mapping, and we plan rewriting some of our existing cloud support and DataSnap technology, DataSnap client technology by using piggybacking on this library. Technically, it has Indy behind the scenes, but it's through a layer, so it's kind of a replaceable implementation. There's no direct binding to Indy specific features. Any question? The other thing I want to mention, there is a REST demo. Oh wait, there is REST debugger. REST debugger shipped with the full source code. By the way, it's a FireMonkey app. It shipped with full source code, so you can not only use the debugger, but also recompile the debugger and see how the debugger is made internally. But there's also another demo, it's called REST demo, that has a bunch of, I think it has simple demo of Facebook or Twitter integration, but the thing is that you need to provide your tokens, ID, go do the open authentication, get back the developer token. So it takes a little to configure, but in itself it has, it demos some of the open authentication scenarios and some of the social network integration scenarios. Yes?
Where is this REST demo?
The REST demo should be among the demos. Let me check. Open. Wait. Let's see. Users, public documents, Run Studio, 12, samples. Interesting. Delphi, REST demo. Yeah. So it has a bunch of options, has samples of Facebook, integration, Twine, Foursquare, Dropbox. So these are technically some of the Twitter. These are some of the libraries that were tested, but again, you need to provide like a bunch of keys, a bunch of elements, go through some web to provide your tokens, get back the OpenAuth token. So it's, I mean, configuration requires some effort. It's not like something you can like doing in a minute. But that's the idea. And this code GS is actually the demos that I was showing earlier, which is the only one. Well, Delphi Praxis also doesn't require authentication. It's an open forum for Delphi developers. Okay, so yeah, that's a good demo to study, to get a feeling of what the library can do, more focused towards social integration. But we think kind of the real power comes also from other angles, the ability to access any data source with a REST/JSON structure behind the scenes. It could be Java, Java RX, I think is the library that does the JSON mapping, web services, web API, but actually it could be almost everything. Any other question? Yep.
Is the library available for all the Delphi versions?
Not sure about the starter, but it is in the professional edition. In full. We are not sure if the plugins like the bus will be for all versions, but the core library is in professional and above, so basically in all real versions of the product. It might even be in starter edition. I really don't know for sure. Yeah. Okay, so that's it. Again, I'll be around for some more time if you have any more specific questions to Delphi or other things. And there's no break. There's a change to another session. Daniela is coming along.
way to do things. So, sorry, but there are a lot of things to say about dorms. This could be a workshop of 2 days. So I will go fast. I hope not too fast. If there are some questions, doubts, and so on, I'll be here for all the time of conference. So, DORM stands for Delphi Object Relational Mapper, and allows to use different databases without changing your business code. So you can connect on Oracle, SQL Server, MySQL, Firebird interface, SQLite with the same business code. And support persistence ignorance. This is not a mechanism to align two versions of the object and to not overwrite data for each other. Do not force to use a particular object list class, because DORM try to understand using a sort of duck typing and dynamic wrapper, and so you can use whatever kind of list. So it works with normative object list, it works with Delphi Spring object list. DORM is perfect for complex logic applications, because data mapper is for this kind of application. Obviously the object state. So basically property and fields. There is a complete separation between domain model and database, because there is a third object between the database, the storage system, and your object with your business logic, your checks, your validation code, and so on, that makes this guy and this guy be completely separated and not dependent each other. Is the idea good? Yes, is it? Because in other language there are, specifically in dynamic language, there is a very huge market for this kind of libraries. So there is Ruby, Java, PHP, .NET, and so on. Is with dynamic languages not so simple, but it's simpler than a static, a strongly typed language. But DORM do a good work also in this, compared to what this other kind of framework does. This is the sequence diagram of a custom or a, let's say, a standard data mapper transition. So there's the client code that asked for a persona object. There is a person object. This request is translated in a SQL query that is issued to the database that creates a result set. The result set is getting by the mapper that creates the actual object, filled with read data, and get back. So you ask it for person object, not select star from people where ID equals, okay? So let's say that you have a set of PODO. PODO stands for plain old Delphi object. T person inherits from T object and has some property and so on. And T manager derives from T person with some other property. This is the 101 course of object-oriented programming. You see animal, T dog, T cat, okay? But you probably don't use it in your business application because you have customers table, orders table, sales tables. So this kind of inheritance, polymorphic things does not match with your business so far. So this is the simplest way in order to create an object representation on a database. You simply create the object, call on this session that is our mapper, this session object method insert, passing the person that you want to insert, and then it's persisted. Then the ID field that is marked as primary key is getting back from the database, and you can find it in your property. You can get it back, release the object, and then load by ID using this generic method. When you load the person by that ID, and you get back that person. That's it. Which kind of database is behind there? Is there a database behind there? No, I don't know. So your code don't know if and what database are using. So if he don't know, it do not depends on it. Okay, let's see some working code, but starting from the beginning. There are two main concepts in DORM: configuration and mappings. The first one is the simple. Configuration is the place where on DORM we can tell what kind of database, so Oracle, MySQL, Firebird, Interbase, and so on. Where is it? So connection string, more or less. How to generate primary keys, because you could have client-generated primary keys or server-generated primary keys. You could use a GUID, or you could use ID, or you could use integer 32-bit or 64-bit. It depends from your database. But for the DORM side, you have to know, it have to know who is in charge to generate the primary key. The way in which that primary keys are generated, don't care. No. And which kind of primary keys are you using? So if integer, strings, and so on. Then the second part is the mapping. The mapping is related to concept like where and how I should persist this object. Or which table name, which is the table name where this object should be persisted. Or which are the field names mapped with these or that properties. Or are there any relations? The person could have, I don't know, the phones collection. So when I save the person, I save the person and all the relation, but only as many as one relation, not belongs to relation. Because belongs to are not part of, so all these concepts are managed by mapping. Okay? So fundamentally, this is where, and this is how. Configuration. The configuration part is in charge of define which is the persistence strategy. The persistence strategy is the only part of DORM that knows intimately the database. Only the persistence strategy knows which is the database, where is the driver, how if there is an NVL function, or there is a decode function or collage function on this one or that one. All the machinery related to the database are confined here on the persistence strategy class. Then there is the connection string, the key generator class. So a class that can generate keys. And a logger class name, because DORM have a mechanism to configure its logging system. Usually there is a dorm.conf file in your app, but you can also use a normal JSON strings. Typically on a desktop application, on a client application, you can have a dorm.conf file on your folder somewhere. But on a web application, where you have DORM on the server side, accessing to the disk on every request is not good. So it makes sense to load the JSON string from the file and use it when needed to, or create a connection pooling. And it's available a default file version in DORM defaults. This is because I cannot remember all the keys, all the stuff, all the class names, and so on. So I created a default file with all the machinery used and the class names used. The default file is located on defaults folder of DORM. You can copy it. There are a lot of comments in it, and you can delete only the part the parts that you don't need. This is a simple configuration file. You can see all the part. There is a key that defines also the configuration environment. With one file, you can have development environment, test environment, release environment. So you don't have to change the file. Simply, you are when you build on debug, you use the development configuration. When you build on release, you will use the release configuration with the same file. The mechanism of the mapping is based on a design pattern called chain of responsibility, introduced for the first time for this book, and is a priority chain. So the first mapping is done by file mapping, but is not used nowadays. It's the first ancient way to do mapping on DORM, more or less 50 years ago. Then there is an RTTI attributes layer. So if there is not information in the file, the mechanism go on the RTTI attributes, and if there aren't attributes to map that particular property, the mechanism goes on the convention over configuration mechanism. So if your object is simple enough, you can simply don't do mapping. All our demos will use RTTI attributes and convention over configuration. So the DORM hello world. I cannot resist to write yet another hello world. This is the hello world. I have my configuration file, more or less what we have seen before. This is the only way in which I can know which kind of database I'm using. My code do not depend from the database itself. So let's start. This is our DORM hello world with a simple insert. This is our database. We are going to create records in people table, no, customer table. Okay, this is the structure of the table. Create the DORM session using the configuration file, but this is not a requirement because you can use a text reader, so you can use a string or whatever. You set also which is the environment, development. There is also unit test, development, production, and so on. Create your object. This is the magic because customer inherit from T object, and then setting the property insert. That's it. Running this, you have a new record here. Let's do something deeper. T-customer has been mapped only where the convention is not met. So T-customer, by default, try to save this class on a customer table. But there is not customer table, there is customers table. So we are instrumenting the class using an attribute called entity, saying which is the actual table where you have to save the instances. Then the properties ID is called ID, so no custom mapping. Name the same, address the same, email the same. Created at is different because on the database I have created _at, while my property is created at without an underscore. So I can instrument it with column. So these fields are mapped using the convention, while this field and the object itself are mapped using attributes. Let's say also some little more complex demo using simple create, retrieve, and update and delete. So the create is obviously the same. Then you can update data in this way. I'm going to save this ID, and then I can use to retrieve the T-customer instance from the database. In this moment, customer has been filled using the mappings on the other side. And then I can call update on that object. And then I can use also the same way to delete that object. The mechanism to use insert, update, and delete is the first method insert that created on Dorm, because allows to persist everything, but it's not so good in real world because you need to track somewhere the state of your object. Has been changed, has not been changed, should be deleted, should not be deleted. To think about a list of objects, read it from the database. Then on the third object, you change a property. You delete the fourth object and add another object. And then you want to save the collection. You need another data structure to track the state of your object. Why another data structure? The same data structure. So in some cases, it's not a problem to know which kind of method you have to call, insert, update, delete. In some cases, better. In many other cases, is a problem. So, has been introduced the object status mechanism. That is more or less simple enough, because you have the possibility to track the state of objects, and it's really, really simple. Where other frameworks try to force you to inherit from other classes, Dorm have an incremental approach. You can add from your derived classes to add feature. You don't have to derive from somewhere and then override. You simply add methods. And Dorm, using RTTI and a mechanism complex, try to call all the method if there are methods. So if that method is there, will be called. If that property is there, will be used. If it is not there, will not be called, is not be used. And there is also a check about what you can do with your object. This property is managed from the object itself or from the code that used that object. You can choose. This property needs to be in this way. This is also a convention. Obj status of type TDorm obj object status. These are the possible values for that property. Dirty means that the object is new or has been changed from the clean version. That means that the object is not changed. So I read it, typically when I read object from the database, the status is clean. Then I update a field and the status becomes, or I can set it manually, the status to OS dirty. OS unknown stands for not defined object status on object, or deleted. That means that the object needs to be deleted from the database. Let's say a demo. We're going to create our session, create a T-customer OS. That is not an operating system customer, but object status customer. I'm inherit from T-customer. This is the incremental approach of Dorm. This could be also a T-button. Override the attributes, add object status as TDorm object status, and mark it as transient. Transient means that this property have not a correspondent field on the table. Is normally used for derived properties or calculated properties. Okay, so you have a date of birth, and you can have you could have another property with age. Okay, so age depends from date of birth. On database, you have only date of birth. It's sort of calculated fields, but the logic behind it could be even more complex. And in this case, the code is really similar to the code before. But now, Object-thesis knows what persist should do. So we are not calling insert, update, delete. We just only call persist. Based on the object status that have a default of 0, that means dirty, is inserted. Then the code is really similar. I can reload from the database, set a property. I choose to manually change the status of the object, and then I call persist another time. But this time, OID, that means object ID, is different than 0 because it's valorized for the primary key. And then this persists with object status OS30 does an update and not an insert. Then I can delete data in this way. Load the data and delete it. Some of you are thinking, but I have to load data to delete it. No? And this is obviously, it should work. Yeah, but these demo are console application because it's simpler to focalize your attention on only the code that needs to be commented. So we see now how to create, update, delete, and retrieve single object. Let's talk about the list of objects. There are a bunch of methods to retrieve list of objects. There are many default behavior that should be correctly understood to know which kind of different methods you have to use. There is one thing that these methods share as a behavior. The single query for single object loads, if there are, loads also the child objects, if there is not a lazy loaded mechanism configured, and if obviously there are. These methods, instead, does not load child object. Why? Because if I have a list of, let's say, invoice, and each invoice have 20 lines, and each lines refer to 2 products, try to issue this kind of method, and you probably are loading all the database in memory. So the list do not load the child object. Typically, when you have a list, you need or a summary of your data, or load a list because someone have to pick one from that list and then load all the data. This is the typical approach. You can do whatever, but the typical approach is loads from the database only the strictly needed fields. That's it. So these are the methods. Load list generics, return all object of type T. This is similar to select star from table. Load list with iCriteria. This iCriteria is a piece of, let's say, SQL code that reduce the, it's a piece of SQL code, let's say, and the object returned are only the object returned from that SQL query. Fill list is similar to load list, but do not create another list. but fill a generic list. But here there is object. While this method returns a T object list of T, this method fills a generic list. This method don't know which kind of list there will be here. So there is a mechanism to understand if that object can be mapped, can be viewed, can be ducket typed as a list or not. This is the interface of the custom criteria. The custom criteria can be shared from different query, be shared from different finders. There is a mechanism in DORM called finders that acts like object-oriented SQL code. So you can derive from one query and use piece of your query, and use piece of your property that acts like parameters for that query. Okay, is a objectification of SQL query. You have only to implement these two methods. When you use custom criteria, DORM do not generate SQL statement, but is used only to do the mapping between the data set, let's say, and the list of objects. How to retrieve list of object 2? There is also a DSQL that stands for .SQL. That is an internal DSL to write query over object. It's not like the Hibernate ones, because it's another things that looks like a real SQL, but is not a real SQL. That is similar to this one. That is similar to Linku or some similar technology in Spring, no? More or less. This acts on database different from Spring, but the mechanism is similar. In this place, you put not the table fields or not the table name, but the attribute fields and the class name. All the queries are prepared, so you can use this syntax for where to create, let's say, compile the query. You are compiling the mechanism that will generate the query, not the query itself. Okay? So this syntax allows you to tell the mapper, hey mapper, get the field mapped by the tperson.firstname and use it in a query. And the query will be from this mapping. Okay? The same for order by and so on. And the specific persistent adapter is in charge to manage the difference between every different database. There are a set of DSQL enabled methods that are the method that ends with SQL. So this is your query, and you can write it like this to return a T-object list of T-person, or use this one, passing a generic list with the same concept as before, to load an already created list using the data retrieved from DSQL. So we are different way to do things. Here's the simple list that produce something like this. We are doing a query using the self star, more or less, load list. But we can also use a search criteria that will use the SQL that finds name and on the, okay, let's see the demo. It's better. Okay, this is your data. I'm shocked to see console character. It's not. It's not too much. I hope. Okay.
You need to make a font bold in your console because it's very hard to read here.
Yeah, probably had to create bigger font. And then this is based on search criteria with a finder like this. This is the mechanism. Load list with finder. In the finder is really simple because you can create also your hierarchy of finders, derives, contains, and so on. But you can also simply inherit from tDorm criteria, implement tcustom criteria, and that's it. In the get item class info, you're going to retrieve the RTDI information, let's say, and in the result, you have your SQL. This is the case where you really have a huge value using SQL. Okay? So, Dorms lets you use SQL to talk down to the meta. No problem. And you can use only the mapper part. Okay, what is a list or collection for DOR? It's an object that can map it to this interface. It's not an object that implements that interface, but that could implement that interface, okay? If DOR can find a meaning for these methods, find a set of methods with the usual naming for a compatible sign. You know the history from the story of the duck typing. If you fly as a duck, if you talk as a duck, if you walk as a duck, you are a duck. That's it. And this is the approach that DORM have. That the implementation is a little bit different because try to get where is the method that could fit this duck. But the interface is similar. So, if an object have a head with a t-object, a procedure, clear, function count, get timer, like this, can be used in DORM. Then, in a offline world, as the world where we live, there is the possibility to overwrite data from someone else's user. Let's say web application or mobile application or a thin client application, where the user download the data using objects and so on, change the data, and then send it to the database. Usually you use the database transaction to handle the lock, but in an offline mechanism, offline architecture, you cannot use the database transaction because the database transaction, when you get the data, is ended before that you get the data. So there is an implementation in DORM of the optimistic offline lock. What does it mean? This object version integer property acts just like the object status. You can write it there, and that's it. Tracks versions of the objects. Is managed from DORM itself, and you don't have to touch it. It's really, you can even, if you generate enough RTTI, you can even put it protected or private. You don't have to touch it. And automatically, ensure that your changes have been made on the last available version of the object in the record. Something like client.set, more or less. And when the object is updated, the object version is automatically incremented. Let's see the demo. Here we have the one demo. This one. Okay. Here we have customer D. That stands for inherit from the customer OS, but it is saved on customers version. This customer version is similar to customer, but have another field that is called object version. When an object, this field is not transient, is required that must be on database. And when you create an object, the object version automatically is initialized to define a number. Then when you persist it, the object version automatically increment. Every time you save your demo, your object. So you have this situation. So you say, okay, but if another is changing my data, this is what happens. In this piece of code, I create my object and I'm saving the ID. Then I create two sessions. A session is more or less like a transaction, like a connection, not a transaction. On these two sessions, I load the same object, version object. Then the first user updates the object and commits. This is the typical situation of the mobile, web, thin client application. This is the typical scenario. Then the second user tries to do the same. Could be also another field, it's not a matter of field. Okay? The repeat persists. Here, if the object is not versioned, the second user overwrites the first one data. Using the versioned object has been changed on the database. Refresh your data and retry. In some cases, the object version is not required. Let's say it's on with data with fast changing rate. Does not make sense that I'm blocking because one is less fast than another. But in the business app where business are handling data in some other ways like invoice sales and so on, the usual cases, this is the approach to follow. Let's talk about object validations, because so far we don't talk about object validations. DORM using its type codes not only for collections, but also for validation. So, if your object has particular methods, that methods will be called on a particular event. And in that methods, you can do whatever you want in terms of validation. Just like, let's say, it could be see as a trigger, a database trigger, but even powerful, more powerful. Let's say this kind of things allows check like this one, allows object and object plus child plus child plus child plus child validation. Scenario like the recalculate the order total before save the order itself. Or you cannot save an invoice with less than 3 details row. Or normal user cannot delete the user with flag admin equals 1. Something like that, this kind of logic. But not only on the single object, but on the object graphs. Okay? There are a set of available events. A part of events are related to validation. So you have validate, that is called at every validation, or insert validate, update validate, delete validate. There are cases that a customer, let's say, could be valid in the insert phase, also if you don't have some information. But when you try to get that object to collect other information, let's say an invoice to a customer without the VAT number, something like this. That kind of update validate should be raised an exception. Or you have a set of events related method. Very similar to the dataset events, but these events are not tied to the dataset, that stupid structure called dataset. Stupid not because it's stupid, because it should not have business logic. So it must be stupid. But these kind of events are related to the life of that object itself. So that object is validated only by itself. And obviously this one are inherited from the child, from the object, from the class that you inherit from there. So the validation can be incremented for every level of inheritance. Let's say the event. You have customer validation. As you see, this is a normal OS, but with two methods implemented. So on before persist and on validate. On before persist, I do simply something like very stupid email to upper. So I want that email is always in uppercase. This is the place where you have to write your code, not in the GUI, in the graphic interface components, or in your SQL, or also in your trigger. The only place where you have to put your code, also this kind of code, is here. And the validation, if it's not valid email, writes an exception. So simply I can write code like this. I wrote email in lowercase, and here there is the email in uppercase. But I could also create an invalid email, and then I'll get an exception. Email is not valid. In all the place where that object is used. However, SQL is not the heavy. In some cases, writing raw SQL is the best approach. For example, set the product discount to 22%. No logic, 22%. I have 10,000 of products. I cannot load each product, update the property, and do an update. If there is logic behind this kind of action, that makes sense, because there is a logic that could be put in transaction, that could generate other records in other tables, and so on. But if there is not logic, you can do SQL like this. You must do SQL like this. In this case, you can use commands. Commands are very similar to finders, but do not return a data set to map somewhere. So I simply get SQL, you have update product discount, execute command, that's it, and return the number of rows affected, that objects affected. Okay, let's say a VCL demo called To-Do Manager. This demo used light binding, so it's not so fast. However, this is the demo. You have your simply structure, and you can double click, set it, change your data, set, persist. You can filter only for not completed. Double click, are you editing your data? You can add other data, delete somewhere. That's it. How's implemented? In the refresh here, we have criteria. There is another way to do filtering that is a bit old a bit powerful, but a bit old respect to DSQL. But it's just to show that there is the way. It is more declaratively way to create a filter. If check filter is checked, create that criteria and fill list. Which list? The list where the live bindings is connected. So I disconnect the binding source, fill the list, and reconnect the bind source. When I do the double click here, I can simply pass to the other form the reference to the current object. That's it. It's not another data set with some other logic, with other calculated fields, with all the machinery needs to do something like this. But simply the same object. Obviously, you can, in this place, loads also the relations. Lazy loading. Okay? If you have a list of 10,000 objects, probably your user don't want to handle 10,000 objects, want to find somewhere in that 10,000 objects, and then use it only that one. So in this case, you can pass the object on the form edit to do. There is only the binding machinery to connect the object to the live binding, and that's it. All the logic is only one place. When you come back from the show model, set the object status to OS dirty and let it in the collection. Then, when you call persist, the persist object calls persist collection. Which kind of list? Or a normality object that can be wrapped as list, or a I-wrapped list that is a duck-typed list. That's it. So all your changes remains in memory until you want really to put that on the database. And all what is one of the biggest problems of the ORM framework, that you tend to write not optimal SQL code. DORM is not code write inefficient SQL code, but you have a log to see all the SQL code that it's actually sent to the server. So you can inspect what your application is really doing. Okay, some conclusion. There are many more things to talk about. There will be some speeches also tomorrow talking about dorm on the server and the web client on the browser. But this code is getting started. What do you want? Check the unit test. All the features showed here are on the unit test. There are more or less 200 unit tests, 300 unit tests. Okay, check that unit test. All the features are unit tested. And some tests are a little bit bigger, yes, I know. But there is a test. Check the demos and use the Google Group mailing list to ask, or my Skype account is not a problem. Currently, are supported this database. There is support for an old support for SQL Server, but it's not more maintained. I don't know.
Why?
If you need the SQL Server support, hit here, that person, that man. But it's not difficult to create a persistent adapter. It's a matter of hours, not days. You can use the Firebird one or the Interbase one to see how to create persistence adapter for your database. It's really, really simple. Then, some success case. The first one, in Italy there is one of the most popular software to do invoice billing orders is written in Delphi. And they are doing the port to use DORM because they cannot continue to manage that complex logic in that data set. So they are porting that application on DORM. And one of the person behind this port is also a contributor of DORM. And this company handle thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of rows of data in their case. Success case 2. It's really fresh, 2 days ago. Mr. Simonov from Russia, he says on Skype, our company is engaged in the production and sale of special vehicles. So what kind of special vehicles? He told me, I'm using DORM for an application of document management, order planning, drawing up plans for the production of special vehicles, communication between employees, store design documents. I asked him, but how many concurrent users? 450, 480. I say, user. I want the concurrent user. Yes, these are the concurrent users. What kind of company is? This company makes this kind of vehicles to transport oil, petroleum, and other trees from all over Russia, from east to west. And the problem is to not only to put people and vehicle from one point to another point, but also the loads. This kind of vehicles, this is a frozen lake. I don't want to be that big person here. There is the YouTube videos at some point the truck's like.
Sorry, I don't want to be the one upstairs.
Not even. This is really an horror movie, looks like. And Mr. Simonov says, I use a Spring for Delphi and DORM, and I love it. I was going to go in C# world, but now I think I'll stay a little bit in the world of Delphi. In my point of view, these are the kind of frameworks that Delphi needs. Spring, the general framework to do a lot of things, and framework like DORM. This is the way because I built this kind of framework. It's not because it is mine, but because it really needs. Okay, thank you. Are there any questions?
Yes. If you have a report and there is a complex query with many tables, so I cannot map all tables on an object, how I can execute the
Are
query?
there logic in that report?
No.
Don't use them.
Okay.
You can do select and mapping. That's it. Or you can do also on select.
Mhm.
Use the right tool for the job. DORM is perfect to handle complex logic.
Okay. And if a table has a multiple column key, not one column for a key, it's possible to define a complex key.
From the architecture point of view, is possible, but currently is not there. But you have to define a new keys generator that, or not a keys generator, because probably you put the key in the table. I don't know, probably. And you can also have object without key on the insert and so on. And you can define which field used on the where statement. So yes, you can. Not in the version in the current version, but it's not difficult to implement because DOM is really open. You can do whatever you want. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Stefan.
Actually, got two questions. One is about the validation. I always tend to extract it from the object itself and have an external validator class. Is that possible to do it with, well, not have the validate method inside my T-customer or other classes?
Yes, you can. You can create a super object layer with all the methods that you need defined, and then in that methods you can call the correct validators with some sort of service locator. You know what I talk about. And you can pass that object to validator. So the concept is who should know where and when validate that data. The object itself, okay, but the code could be some other place, no problem. So you can pass the object to someone else that actually does the validation and get back okay, not okay, and then you can raise an exception or not. You can, yes. The second?
The other question is about one-to-many relationships, and when you're loading a list, and the objects inside your list have.
Sorry, I have one demos. Because I prepared their demos, but probably I jumped it. Relations, that's it. Okay, sorry, I talk about this and then tell me if I reply to your question. Person, entity people, then you have some mapping and phones. You can define as many person ID. That means that this class is an object of with this attribute. You are saying, because in Delphi you cannot know which is the generic type inside that list, that type. So you have to declare list of this kind of object. And so here it simply works like this. The person, create phone, add phones, number model, second phone, third phone, persist the person. And automatically, and a bit of automatic jiggle, save all the object graphs. Then, this is the simple part, because you can load the single object and then all the relations that are not marked as lazy load are pulled up from database. Here, you can update your child object, add another object, and persist the person. Is this your question?
Now my question comes, if I have a list of persons and I'm loading the list of persons, does it does it do the lookup for the phone numbers on each record, or does it load all the phone numbers and then map the phone numbers to the persons? Because that is one of the problems many ORM systems have.
Currently there is a method of the dorm session that you can pass an object and tells, please load all relation of this object. Currently, the loading is for single object, but it's my top priority to find a good way to load a page of records. Because you could have also 1,000 of objects. So you could have where clause where you have id equals 1 or id equals 2 or id equals 3. Okay, you cannot use an in because the in is limited. So you have to paginate this piece of. But the loading is really simple because you can order by parent id and that's it. The problem is to paginate the piece of. Yes, the problem is only to paginate. So actually, currently loads only the by records, but you can implement it. Or is my top priority. Other questions?
Yes, similar to that. If I want to filter all persons who have a specific phone or maybe some more complex filter related to a child entity, is it possible to generate SQL or better to make a filter that I expect will generate a join on the database?
Do you want to filter
Okay, let's say I
the
want
object already loaded
I
or
make another
from the database?
example. I want to have a list of all orders where one of the order line is related to a product. So I want to filter order details
sorry.
and not orders.
Tu vuoi farlo sul database, sta way?
No, voglio farlo
Sui oggetti già creati?
Esatto.
Okay, you can use Spring for Delphi because it's
Okay.
the list.
No.
I am dorm
Vai
is
alla concorrenza. Ho capito.
the list is not tied to dorm. Dorm don't want to talk with list. The list are list of objects. That's it. Finish. So you can, there is a set of methods to iterate over collection, to do something.
I was thinking about maybe I'm working with link in .NET, so I was thinking about something like select from you put T person and something like join T phone numbers where T phone number is my phone, and I expect coming up a person that is me and one child that is the
You
phone
can
number.
currently you can do it on database. Obviously, you can. It's really simple. You can do on list of object using anonymous method with a for each. You can do a for each, but it's not like you told. You have to write code to do that filter. If you want a syntax similar to what you talk about, there is in Spring
No, it's not a
something like
problem of
this.
syntax, it's a
No?
problem
In
of
Spring, it's
functionality.
just doing on the collection you already retrieved. I think what he was asking for is some kind of mechanism that link to SQL has, because link to SQL takes in the lambda expression that you're parsing, like where phone number starts with 1, 2, 3 or something, and then it translates it into an SQL query, which then only returns those records.
Oh,
that-
it's all about
maybe
the
I
filter
can-
on the list.
Okay, I mean this. I can filter on properties of one single object, T person. But often I need to filter on properties of child objects.
I think
This
that-
is what you
And,
can do.
This usually is a join in a database, but of course we'll.
This is what you can do.
Okay.
You have a wrapped list
Mhm.
that is whatever collection you want, blah, 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 and you have a T predicate that gets every object on the list. If that predicate returns true, that object will be in the returned list. If that predicate return false, you don't get that object in the list. But it is not similar to link okay? You have to you can put a set of filter and that's it. It's a matter of write the code there. That's it. Other questions?
Which is the minimal version of that driver?
There are a lot of bugs on RTTI before, a lot of bugs on RTTI, dot. Then, there are even more bugs on RTTI to XC2. So, some features works since XC, some features does not works. There is some compatibility class to work on XC. For example, you can use a wrapped list since XC3. In XC2, you have to use TDOM collection because there is a bug in RTTI, and in the list that have a method private so that you cannot. You read something about that? No?
Could be.
Yeah, could be.
I wrote about a lot of articles.
And you cannot access, DORM cannot access the RTTI to that methods, and so you need another object that acts like that one. But it's a matter of method visibility, RTTI, and so on. It's not a big things. You can use it. You can use it.
So the straight answer is XC7.
Maybe. Okay.
And how about the plans to move DORM on mobile?
DORM currently has not been compiled on LLVM platforms. It is planned, but it is not my priority, or at least my priority, because DORM is a EV framework, and on a small size device could be too EV probably. I don't know. I don't have test on it. But this is my thinking. So probably I will not port this framework in next months on mobile. But I'm thinking about something like Active Record that is more lighter, more simpler, and so on. And also have a lot of nice things for this kind of mechanism. But it's not my top priority to port it on mobile. But if you want, it could be your top priority. I'm always looking for contributors. Are there any questions? Any other? No? Okay, thank you. Bene, benvenuti al talk su Delphi MVC Framework. Is there any not Italian people? Okay. Not going with English. Well, some sort of. Okay, we're going to talk about Delphi MVC Framework, RESTful interfaces and dynamic web pages with Delphi. What is Delphi MVC Framework, or DMVC Framework for short? Is a web framework for XE3, XE4, XE5 web solution, have a built-in web server, and a support for HTTP and HTTPS. It uses Embarcadero Web Broker. This is the reason because I have web server support for HTTP, HTTPS. It uses Embarcadero Web Broker, but it's not tied to it. So it's a very, at lunch we was talking with some people talking about the micro framework. It's not full stack of things that try to do everything. The MVC framework does few things, but in my point of view, it does it in very well way. So it uses Embarcadero Web Broker, but it's not tied to it. So can use also with other, let's say, web framework based on Delphi. It's inspired to Java JAX-RS. Someone knows JAX-RS specification? Okay. It is simple, and you can be productive in few minutes. It's not a few hours, few days, few months, few minutes. And also have a very nice logo. So, the MVC framework main features is really RESTful. Roy Felding probably tried to find some reason because this is not RESTful, but it is RESTful. Because it's compliant with the Richardson Maturity Model Level 3, that is the glory of REST. It's designed with web service and web client app in mind. So it is designed to create application server and web client application. But let's say thin client application. So you can use it for Delphi thin client, for whatever thin client, for mobile thin client. Well, allows also to create server-side generated web page using Lua, embedded Lua. Can be used in a load balanced environment using Memcache. So let's say it not try to do everything. It integrate with many pieces of code, many software and something else, but it not try to do everything. Can use fancy URL with parameter mappings on the URL. Then have also an integrated Delphi REST client that don't want to be competitor with the Embarcadero ones, but simply when I start to write this one, there were no REST client in the Delphi. And have also messaging extension using Stomp. Stomp is a protocol that is used in messaging with messaging-oriented middleware, like Apache ActiveMQ, Apache Apollo, Rabbit, and so on. And have also an experimental support for IOCP. That stands for IO Competition Port. Is technology, is a Windows technology that the MVC framework can support. What kind of application can be built with the MVC framework? Application server, of course. RESTful web service, classic web application, where with classic item with server-side generated page. Web client application, messaging solution, Delphi thin clients, mobile and web backends, scalable system because load balanced. Nothing in the MVC framework is tied to the single machine memory. You can share over paritetic machine on a cluster without problem. And can build also secure web server using HTTPS. This is the simple architecture. You have your database, whatever, and the MVC framework, and thin client, mobile client, web client. This is the simple and the basic application architecture, but can be grown to this one, where you have a set of web server using the MVC framework, behind a reverse proxy like Nginx or Apache HTTPD, configured as a reverse proxy, with the same clients also here, and a set of state server that allows you to get better performance, adding machine. You can put machine, plug the network cable, and that's it. This is the way in which the MVC framework works. And obviously, accessing database. From this to this, you can use whatever piece you want. So you could, for example, use the 2 MVC framework without using a reverse proxy, but using round-robin mechanism based on IP and so on, so you don't need a state server. Or you can use multiple databases, or you could, there is no problem. It's a little piece with a little tile that can be used to create your system. This is the usual request-response cycle. For the web page request, you have the initial request. For the HTML, for the static assets, let's say. And then you talk with the MVC framework using AJAX, XML, HTTP request, and so on. In the mobile desktop scenario, you have Android, iOS, Delphi, and put your language here. And you can access your data, your logic, your view, your queries, whatever, using simple request and response, because you don't have to download the initial user interface. This is your first DMVC framework application. This is the only line to write. This MVC engine is the starting point for the old framework. Acts like a router. So it gets the request, it selects the correct controller and the correct action, call it, passing request and getting a response, and get back to the client. It's really, really simple. Just like, but a bit simple than JAX RS in Java. This is the Richardson maturity model legal. Starts from 0, and then you can adding RESTful feature, get into hypermedia controls. That stands for routing based on accept header, and you can get you can send to the client data based on what the client actually asks. The MVC framework is there. Okay, let's talk about controllers, action, and routing. The internal architecture of the MVC framework server is composed by one application, obviously, many controllers. Controllers are classes, simple classes, that inherits from TMVC controller. Then many actions for each controller, quindi a set of controller, a set of action for controller, and controller's action are its method instrumented with specific attributes. Controller is addressed using a piece of URL, a segment of the URL. and action are selected using the second part of the URL. What does it mean? This one. This is your server name. This is your mapping that address your controller that could be called Donald Duck. This one. There is no link between URL and the actual class name. And then there is the last part, last segment of the URL that address a specific action into this controller. So there is a finding in 2 steps. This is how the controller and with a single action looks like. This is a generic blog that handle resources of kind blog, but you can define whatever resources here. It's a piece of URL. This is the simple way when you have here the resource name here or the method on that resource. In this way, you are defining this controller with this piece of URL. Then, all the URL after this blog is used to address the correct method. So, this configuration match this kind of URI. What is this part and this part? Using this syntax, you are telling to the action that that part of the URL is a mapped parameter. So this URL matched with blog / post / then year, month, title. So this method have 3 mapped parameters. The first one is called year, the second one month, and the last one title. Then the second year, month, other thing, title. But also like this and also like this. So there is a mechanism to route based on URL. This is the first step, the URL matching. There are a set of attributes that can be used to instrument classes and methods. MVC path, we already saw that, this one, that can be used on classes and methods. It's not optional. You have to use it. If you don't use MVC path, you are not creating a controller. So MVC framework cannot find your controller. Is used for routing. Then there is MVC HTTP method that can be used only on methods, is optional, and is used for routing. What does it mean, MVC HTTP method? Is the allowed methods that can call that URL. So you can have 2 actions with the same URL, but one is mapped on, let's say, get, and the other one is mapped on post, or post and put. With the same URL, you can routing based on HTTP method and URL. Then there is MVC consumes. MVC consumes can be used only on method, is optional, and can be used for routing. What situation is used consumes? To route based also on what the client actually asked. So if the client requires something using an accept header, you can route also using that header. Then we'll see something there. And then there is MVC produce that is optional, is not used for routing, but defines the default content type for that action. So this is used for routing and represent what the client asked for in terms of formats, MIME types. This one is used to set the default content type for the request. Is equals to JAX arrays, JAX arrays. This is a little bit complex controllers and routing. So the first action, who is so proud to tell, so brave to say which method, which URL could invoke the first action? Which kind of method could invoke the first action? HTTP method. Mark. Yeah. Which kind of URL?
Post.
Let's say /blog /post /3 /hello /bye-bye. The second one is similar, but is invoked only with post. These are other examples based on other methods. You can invoke the same action with multiple HTTP methods. You can use, for example, post and put. And you can also use MVC produce. With produce, you're going to set which is the default content type and default encoding that action will produce. Is not used for routing, is only a default. Then there is also the consumes. This is a little bit complex. This method is invoked with an URL like /blog /post /2013/11 only for post verb, only if client asked for application /JSON. Okay? In this way, I don't know, some of you know Ruby on Rails? In Rails, you can define this kind of routing because you can also ask for different representation for each resource. You can get a resource asking for a JSON representation, or you can ask for a resource asking for HTML representation or image representation of something types. This is the same things. So you can ask it for a specific MIME type. Talking about request parameter, there are 4 types of request parameters that are all the things that clients send to the server. So query string is available for each HTTP verb. URL mapped available for each HTTP request. Request body only for method that provide this kind of functionality. And cookies available for each HTTP verb. This is the way in which you can read parameters. These params use on a waterfall this order. So try to find param name in the URL parameter mapped parameters. Then if it doesn't find the param name on the URL parameter mapper, the query string parameter, then it search into the form parameter, like the form submit of the web page, and then in the cookie field. So you can write your code in this way. This request can be read in this way. You can read as a string or as integer, or read as a string and then convert to integer. What is that? You see? Just a matter of style. And this one. Your code to read is the same. Because params uniform the way in which the parameters are read from the request. So the way you try to read, can you see the similarity? Okay, let's say some routing demos. Are there any questions about what we talk about now? No? Good. Search customer. Search customer can be invoked with this URL. I don't want a specific controller mapped, so this controller is called directly straight. So search text and page. This produce text plain and consumes only text HTML. That is the header that the okay, thank you. The header that a normal browser sends to the server. So if I want to call this method, I have to ask for search. I can also read order by field, let's say like this. Order. Okay. And this produce text plain. This is, I can prove it, text plain, okay? Then the same things can be done with a more complex mechanism, just like this one, people get ID, and they can render, this is a concept, the next concept, can render a simple object. Let's say the next demo. Renders. Renders are a set of controller methods that actually produce the response stream. The routing part is the first part. Then, usually your code tries to read parameters from the request and produce something as a response. The renders are a set of controller methods inherited from the MVC controller that actually produce the response stream. There are a lot of render methods with overload for many types of data. You can render text, data sets, JSON values, Delphi objects, list of Delphi objects, exceptions, HTML pages using embedded Lua, row streams, and you can also set the HTTP return code with that render. Let's say you want to render a T-object descendant. This is the code. There is no conversion, no nothing. That's the object, and the render knows how to render it. Or a JSON value method is the same. Render J, render P, it's the same. Or render a data set. This method gets the current web model where you have eventually put your data set. Then there is also a demo with DOM, obviously. But you can get a reference from a data set and then simply render it. That's it. So in the simple scenario, you can get your parameter from the request, put the parameter on your query, and render that query. That's it. Or if it's not a get method, but is a put or post method, you can get the parameters, usually on the body of the request, map it on the JSON object over a Delphi object on over another data set, and then call post. That's it. All the conversion, JSON object, object, JSON dataset, JSON dataset, and so on, are built in the framework. You don't have to create conversion and so on. The part of the framework that does this render, this conversion, has been around for the last 5 years. And it's called Mapper. Some of you probably know it. There it is. Some demos. All the project, all the projects are built using the default template for Delphi. The default template is this one. New project, web broker, web server application. Choose your kind of application, let's say standalone console application. Next. HTTP port, HTTPS, next. Okay, you can go here, web module, double click. Oh, fantastic. On create, here. MVC 2 point equals MVC engine dot create self. That's it. All the demos that we are seeing are created with this way, and then you are adding your controllers if you want. But this engine is a working DMVC framework application with some stuff already in there and so on. Let's reopen the samples. Okay, renders. So you see here I have my single line to create the MVC framework engine, and then add the controller. Add controller. This is the controller we are talking about, and that's it. This is the reason because ISO is based on WebBroker, but it's not tied to WebBroker. Then let's say some kind of renders. These renders mimic a sort of file. In this way, you can write something like this. And try to invoke this action. Customers /123.html. This is not a file. It's a root. Or virtually I could have whatever file you want. How it actually works? Simply using response stream, that is the lowest level types of renders. That simply is a string stream. You can put whatever, and end of line render. That's it. Or you can try to respond with a data set. In the data set, you have get current model, query customer, open, render data set. In this demo, I have this query customer, query editor, select star from customer, good old. I can ask for this using this route. If the database is up,
And run.
because this is interface. Should be up now. Okay. Okay. And this is the normal serialization of a data set. There is no metadata and so on. Some Delphi-specific solution puts all the metadata in the serialization format. But if your client is not Delphi, that serialization metadata is useless. It makes it difficult to read that JSON. With the MVC framework, you can put the metadata of the data set, but normally you have only the data, because a JavaScript client, I don't know, mobile client, I simply want this one. Then, let's try to get a T object. We are using produce HTML application JSON. So I can ask for customers/34. If here there were written text HTML, that data would be rendered as a standard HTML representation or a standard XML representation. These other kind, customers.json. That's it. This is the available render. There are really a lot of render available. Questions about render? No. Good. So, one thing that usually is really important on application server is filtering the request. You have not a stable connection with your client. So you have to identify your client using a sort of cookie or session mechanism based on cookie or write and so on. And you want to centralize your access check code in some and only some part. The best thing should be only one part, one piece of code. The filtering action is this mechanism. You can intercept each action code. So every action and every controller can be intercepted when it's called. And there is also initialization methods on controller based. Let's say the actions filter. Here you have your business object, okay? Action filter. I have my method, my action, mapped on people/something. And then I have my MVC controller after create, MVC controller before destroy, that are per controller invoked, but also on before action and on after action. So in on before action, I can put code like this. You cannot use this service in this weekend. Okay? If handled is true or exception is raised, the actual action is not called. While if handled is false or not action is raised, the action is called. Or you can use just for logging purpose. There is a mechanism in the MVC framework to access a very powerful log mechanism. Is not configurable in the term of DORM, let's say, but you can configure the level of log that you want. And this log mechanism, let's say, people/this, okay? We are not in the weekend, but let's say that we are in the weekend, or for each method, or this is not a granted IP or is not the time frame on the working days or whatever. Simply, you cannot use this server in the weekend. What happens when an exception is raised on server? An exception is only another kind of data. So, based on the accept header of the client, the web server renders the exception in a according way. So, in these cases, the client is a web browser. So the accept header is text/HTML. And so the exception is rendered using HTML. If you are using this application server with a REST client from the Delphi one or another Delphi client, a REST client, and are setting the accept header with application/JSON, the exception is returned using a JSON object. And the HTTP error code is a valid HTTP error code for the situation that has been raised. Then there is a mechanism to handle session. As you know, in WebBroker there is no session management facilities, but the MVC framework has this mechanism built in. There is also a config object with session timeout expressed in minutes. And session, as usual, is a key value structure. There is a session per user and a session per application. Application session is shared for every user. It's synchronized, but take care of what you put in the application session. Can be not a good things to use application session. In some cases, it can be useful. You can delete your session, let's say in a logout request using session stop and so on. In this way, you are reading the username, you login, select, and so on. Then, server-side view. There is a lot of talking about the client-side application, and the MVC framework is particularly designed to do application server with client-side application, JavaScript, Delphi, mobile, and so on. But you can also use server-side views. Has been developed for this framework, and tomorrow Marco and Daniele Spinetti will talk about, Marco Quadroneve, Daniele Spinetti will talk about the mechanism behind this integration between Delphi and Lua. And this makes Lua available as PHP for HTML, JSP for Java, and so on. Using these two kind of mechanisms. This is an expression, and this is a scriptlet. You can use whatever language you want. Question, why Lua? How many of you knows Lua? Lua is small, fast, and simple. The whole implementation is more about 6,000 lines of C language. Has been designed as extension language. This is the greatest thing. Has been designed as extension language. Is dynamic. So to generate string is good, it's fantastic. And have a great extensibility, and it's widely used also in outside the Delphi world. You have a Lua interpreter also in JavaScript. You can program microcontrollers using Lua. And it's very, 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 very popular. It's used everywhere. It's used also in Apache HTTP server, Adobe Photoshop, Lightroom. Is the most popular scripting language for game programming. Is used on Grand Theft Auto. Is used on World of Warcraft. Is used whatever you have to customize something in a simple and fast way. It's the fastest scripting language ever. This is the way in which an eLua sample, eLua page looks like. but you can also use some helper like Ruby on Rails. And there is a way to pass data, also very complex data, from Delphi, retrieved from database, parameters, whatever, to a view written in embedded Lua using this syntax. Let's see this application. Okay, as you see here, I'm asking for index.ilua file. I can write something, send your data, and this is another page. This is my index.ilua page. As you can see, there are a set of view helper that you can instrument using function, more or less, just like Ruby on Rails, but more faster. And then when you click submit, you ask for /customer action that is mapped on this method that is called create customer that can load customer underscore show view. So all the method that you can push to the view, there is a method called push JSON to view, push model to view, push dataset to view, to actually do the actual rendering. This application is completely based on Lua language. And it's built, the Lua support is built into the framework. Is blazing fast. The Lua pages is compiled, pseudo-compiled, just like application server does in JSP page. So try to convert it in executable code and then execute that page, and the subsequent request is executed from that code. But it's really, really fast. Then the MVC framework can also serve static files with images, JavaScript, binary, and so on. And these allow to use web client JavaScript framework in a very, very, very simple way. So let's say some demos about it. There is wine cellar server. This application is based on Firebird, so I have to start it. Okay. This application has been used by an employee of Adobe to compare different client-side framework, JavaScript. And I normally use it to show different technology and so on. This is obviously based on jQuery on the client side, so it's really, really simple and can handle simple but an application that really works. And in the back end is there is a MVC framework application server that maps all the routes. This is for search wines, this is for get a specific wine, this is for update a specific wine. And then there is a simple data module with some component on it, you have that only one connection, with some mapping mechanism. This mapper is built on the framework. And so you can simply update wine, pass the JSON object, and then render the response. That's it. But the really powerful approach is based on DORM. This is the same client application that use the same server routes, but that use DORM about the searching and so on. So if you try to, there is no more data module, and you have simple something like this. probably also if you don't know the framework, you know what this code does. Let's say this is an update wine by ID, or gets wine by ID, or delete wine by ID. Let's say get load parameter, and then render if get, or deleted persist if delete. That's it. Or wine list. This is a really stunning symbol. Okay, let's say that one of the last demos that used AngularJS, a framework from Google for web client application that is really fantastic. Okay. This is the web application built with AngularJS, Bootstrap, and Delphi MVC framework. And it's really simple. If you try to find the source code, is stupid. And you can create, you can edit. There is a crisis. You can delete, and so on. The methods on the server are really, really simple. There is our business object, get all to do, get to do, update to do. That's it. You are simple. Load list, render list as property, or get to do. Retrieve the parameters, load by D, render. That's it. Or update. There is some error checks, and then JSON array to object list of T to do, reading from the JSON array that the client sends, and then persist collection. You can also send a bunch of objects that will be saved on the server. This allows also putting the object status in the object, allows also a mechanism very similar to the client data set, because it is a design pattern on the client. So the client can change the status, and the server can update, delete, insert only the object according to its state. This is the methods that are exposed for the login system that is simply already there. It supports load balancing. You can create two kinds of memory sessions. Memory session, and works only on the singular machine, or state server. The state server is built, is memcached, is a well-known system to do caching. Then there is a messaging station. This is a little bit of beta. These messaging extensions are simply already there. You can create the server and the messaging extension that allows callback, all the stuff like chat, like dispatching messaging, and so on, already there. It used Apache ActiveMQ or Apache Apollo using a Stomp client. And on each method, on every method, you can enqueue message on a topic. And then all the clients subscribe to that topic, reads that message. That's it. All the message, all the subscription are durable. That means that if you disconnect and then reconnect after 3 hours, you can read all the lost message. Also, the mechanism of the queue are really load balance enabled. You can obviously enqueue JSON object, not only string. Let's say the callback demo. That probably is the last demo. project. Good. Good. Fantastic. Yeah, I should have already go back demo. Okay. Let's use another browser. With the time of Firefox. I have on the background Apache Apollo running. Can be installed as a service, can be put on is a really powerful messaging server. This is Firefox. Okay. Login. I don't know. I don't know. Well, I have my demo here. So now it's no more lyrics, okay? I don't know what's going on. Something. Oh, there is some update. Okay, this is a merge from SVN, probably somewhere. However, let's see the code. This is the actual mechanism to read to send and read the message. So we send a URL just like this to the server to include your message to the chat, and then you can read your message with this one. Success, go to go in the page, you're done, and set timeout to receive the other message. And this mechanism works also on, obviously, works also on Delphi as a client. Then there is also a REST client that looks like a normal REST client that allows you to map JSON object to Delphi object, and allows asynchronous, just like jQuery, with exception response, and always. This is the always method, execute always. This is the request, the actual request. There are a set of sub-projects. The first one is Mapper, that we already see, that is in charge of convert object to JSON, data set to JSON, and back. Then there is the Lua Delphi binding that allows also to handle the embedded Lua pages. Tomorrow there will be talk about it. And then, are there any questions?
The load balancing is made on cached, or there is more an application running on each server? An instance of application?
You can have many instances on the same machine or other machine, most likely, and then a state server on some other machine. So you can configure each DMVC framework application to talk with a session. There's a session factor you can choose for memory or memcache. So you can use that server to store all the session data. And your application don't change. Other questions? No, there is no way to map method, query string or mapped content method to method parameters by design. Because the mechanism that should be useful could be the JAX RS approach to instrument the attributes to tell this is parameter called A, this is parameter called C, and so on. But currently there is no way to do this, and I don't know if there will be ever this. There will be in the future this kind of things, because in this way you can have whatever interface you want. You can also have one action and try to understand in code. If you try to put the mapping, it's obviously simpler, but it could be also less flexible. So the first approach should be the most flexible possible. Then there could be also other restriction about the mapping. Other questions? No? Okay, thank you. The first day, we'll have the dinner tonight. We're gonna meet at 7:30 outside here on level 0. We have a small bus. We probably need to do one or two transportation trips, but it's gonna be okay. Per gli italiani ci vediamo tutti quanti alle 7:30, tutti quelli che avete prenotato per la cena. Il resto ci vediamo domani mattina alle ore. Chi è che c'ha? Avete un'app con sopra? What time? 10. Okay, 9 tomorrow morning. At 9 we'll see you all here. Okay? Thank you very much for the first day. See you tomorrow morning. Bye bye.